Hey, what's up guys? On today's video, I'm going to share some coding tips which is or a standard in our team. So for the first one, I want to talk about is called naming convention. Let's give you an example. Sometimes we can see people having set a variable like let's say const this string, let's say mic or int 10, which is not very clear and is not really pronounceable to. And to do a better way is what we can do is we can say like name as mic and maybe age is 10 and this is this is a better approach, which is like variable name is more pronounceable and is more meaningful. And like for function, let me give you an example here. If this is a function name called show friends list, we don't know what type of return is going to be. It could be return a list or it could be return maybe a boolean. We don't know that. So we have a better way to do it is if that function return a boolean type, what we can do is we can use should show friend list instead, and then we know it's gonna return a boolean, or we can do that is we can change this function name to is show friend list. We use like should or is or can that start on the beginning of the function name, and then we know the return type gonna be boolean. And we also can use hash. For instance, we have a license. For this kind of name, like start with should is can hash, that we know this function gonna return a boolean type. And for other function, it's better to use like if we sending an email, if this function is sending the email, or you can use like you can start with verb like send email to user. It's very descriptive, and it's easier to understand this what is this function doing. Okay, let's move to next one I want to talk about is variable fallback. What is variable fallback? Basically, it just if you call a property or call a function from an object, this object might not have this variable, or this function is gonna throw an error. And what you can do is you can use something called optional chaining in JavaScript. Let me show you example. Okay, let's say we have a function called get API request, which is gonna return something. It has property called, it might have property called data or not. It could be anything. So we destruct this object, return object, we use data, and then we map through data. This might cause the problem because the return, it might not have property called data, and in the data could be object or it could be string. Maybe it doesn't have map function, and for each one in the array, we call it x. As the item in the array, it might not have a property called ID. This could cause the crash on the program. So what we can do is we can prevent that. We can prevent that by doing this. You can give data a default value, and that it means that's definitely it's gonna be an array, and it has map function. And for the item in the array, it might not have ID. So what we can do is we can use optional chain, which is you get a question mark after the item in the after this object. So if it doesn't have ID, it's gonna return undefined. So this can help program avoid crash. Okay, let's move to next one. Next one I want to talk about is called helper function must be pure function. As we all know, like when we're doing the programming, some of the calculation we want to wrap it as a helper function. So let's give you an example. Function plus ABC function, okay, but in the ABC function, that it has another function called fetch API, and it returns a variable called C. This might cause the problem because the return for the plus ABC, every time it could be different. Once the API return back is different, the return is going to be different. As a helper function, we want the result going to be consistency. So what we can do is we need to make sure a helper function is a pure function. So what we can do is, like, we can like change that, like for helper function, it must be pure function, because a pure function means that whatever you have input, the result, the output gonna be exactly same. That's what we have. That's what we are doing in our team. We make sure helper function is 100% gonna be pure function, and whatever input is, the result gonna be same. Yeah, and that's helper function must be pure function. Let's move to next one. Next one I want to talk about is it's called better to use declarative programming. So let me give you an example. Let's say we have an array 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're gonna loop through this array, and for every item in the array we're gonna add 1. So we use for loop. So this is array, and for that index element plus 1. So this is imperative programming, which is like is a little bit complicated, and it's hard to it's not very clear. You need to go through everything on the line, which is like 3-4 lines. So to do it better, we can use declarative programming, which what we can do is we can use let's say new array. We can array we can use Yeah, this is declarative programming, which is like more easier to understand. It's more close to human language. So this is what we do in our team. That is like more clear. It's more understandable. Okay, next one I want to talk about is called avoid nesting ternary operator. Let me show you an example. Sometimes just ignore the error here. Sometimes we can see this kind of code in React, and we have like a conditional check. If subscribe is true, we're gonna return that, and otherwise we're gonna return something else. But in something else, you got another conditional check, which is like not very clear sometimes. What if there is like a 3 or 4 conditional check? It's gonna be nested, and it's gonna be the code gonna be very messy. So a better way to do that is, what we can do is we can have return early. Return early means that we check that if subscribe is true, we're gonna return this element, and if that's not true, we're gonna do something else. As long as we have meet the condition, it gonna return earlier. Okay, and this kind of code is like more easier to understand. We don't need to worry about nesting. We don't worry about messy code. Understand and better to read. Next one I want to talk about is called listing components should be separate as an individual component. Let me show you an example. Let me copy a code from here and paste that. Let's go through this component. Have some prompts, and then return a div with the topic. And here on this block of code, it is article array map article array, and return something else. Return another div, but in the div there's a header, a paragraph, and an image, and a text and a button. So for this, if this block code gonna get very, like, it could be something else. It may be more than title and teaser. It could be something else, maybe another header and a small header, or another image. It could be very messy and very hard, difficult to debug, and it's not very clear. It's not really readable for this kind of code. So to optimize it, what we can do is we can separate this list to another component. Let me show you an example here. Let's say component 2. Same block code, but this one is more easier to read because we separate article list to another component. So on article list component, what we care is we only pass article prompt to this component. So article list is gonna deal with all messy things or detailed thing about this article, but on component 2, it doesn't really care about what is exactly going on in article list. So it basically it's just like one of the principle. It just separate the responsibility, and it's just easy to debug, easy to read. Okay, that's for listing component should be separate component. Okay, let's move to next one. Next one I want to talk about a void nesting rendering function. Let me show you an example here. Let's say component 3. At very beginning of React, I often doing that to render. I set a return element, which I wrap it in the function. Then on the parent component, I just use this. You just call this function in the div. It's like a common mistake that everyone doing that at the very beginning of React, but it's not a mistake. But it just get a better performance is that we separate this render header into another component. For instance, we can do like this, like we import header from another component, and then we used header component in this, for instance, component 4, and it's easier to understand and it's easier to debug. Like for instance, we have a header here for we might have something else like content. We might have content, and we might have like a footer. Yeah, because it could be more. It could be more than header. It could be like 10 different components. So what we do is that we separate that into different module or different components, and it's easier to read. It's simple for this component, instead of like we have a lot of the like render header, render content, render footer, or etc. So it just by separate component, it just like a modular code. It's more easier to debug, to maintain, to reuse. Okay, and for next one I want to talk about is the component or function import export orders. So normally what we do in our standard in our team, we do like we import from third library first on first line, and after first line, after third library, then we're gonna import a common component or common function. For instance, we have header, which is like gonna use in different pages, and after common component or common method, we're gonna import the private component, private functions. And for export, we export like this. We export an object, and then the final we export as default. Default export always stay in the final line. Okay, we have covered quite a bit of tips of writing a code, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope this video gonna help you guys to on writing a code. Okay, that's it for the video for today. Thank you very much, guys. I'll see you on next video.